When Ezra Blackwood's cattle started dying the morning after he kissed Clara Whitmore, the whole territory knew the devil had finally come to collect. You can almost smell the dust settling over the Blackwood Ranch, 3,000 acres of prime, Montana grazing land that had turned men green with envy for 2 decades. Ezra stood on his wraparound porch, watching his prize Angus bull collapse beside the water trough, foam streaming from its mouth like bitter creek water. The animal's eyes rolled back, showing whites that gleamed like bone in the dawn light. 30. Head in 3 days, muttered Jonas, his foreman, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Ain't never seen nothing like it, boss. But Ezra had seen plenty. He'd watched his father's fortune crumble when the banknotes came due early. He'd seen his mother fade away like morning mist after the 3rd miscarriage. He'd buried 2 wives already, one to fever, one to a rattler's bite, and sworn off love like a man swears off whiskey after waking up in his own vomit. Yet here he stood, 35 years old, and fool enough to marry the 1 woman in 3. Counties that decent folks crossed themselves against. Clara Whitmore. The name itself was whispered like a curse around Salvation Creek. She'd been married 4 times, and each husband had met his maker within a year of saying, "I do." Heart attack, barn fire, stampede, mysterious fever that turned a strong man's blood black as ink. The town preacher refused to perform another ceremony, claiming her very presence made the church bells ring backwards. "You sure about this arrangement?" "Mr. Blackwood." The lawyer's hands had trembled as he'd drawn up the marriage contract 3 weeks prior. The woman's got a reputation that'd make a buzzard nervous. Ezra had signed anyway. Clara's late husband, poor bastard number 4, had owned the water rights to Silver Creek, the lifeline that kept half the valley green. With the drought choking the land and his cattle dropping like flies, Ezra needed those rights more than he needed superstitious gossip. The wedding had been a grim affair. Clara stood at the altar in a dress black as a funeral shroud, her pale hands folded like prayer over a belly that had never quickened with child. Her dark hair was pulled back severe, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if not for the hollow look in her green eyes, the look of a woman who'd watched too much die. When the traveling preacher had pronounced them man and wife, Ezra had leaned in for the customary kiss. Clara's lips were cold as winter stone, but something electric had passed between them. For just a moment, her eyes had fluttered closed, and he'd glimpsed something vulnerable beneath the armor of her reputation. That night she'd moved into the guest room without a word. No wedding feast, no celebration, just the sound of her bare feet on the floorboards and the way the house seemed to hold its breath around her presence. "Maybe we should send her away," Jonas suggested now, his weathered face creased with worry. "Before she ruins us complete." Ezra studied his dying herd, remembering the spark he'd felt when Clara's lips touched his. The newspapers back east were full of stories about scientific progress, electric lights, telegraph wires, steam engines that could pull a whole town behind them. Maybe what folks called curses were just mysteries waiting to be solved. "No," he said finally, "not yet." Because deep in his bones, beneath the practical calculations and the mounting dread, Ezra Blackwood suspected that Clara Whitmore wasn't the source of his troubles. She was the key to ending them. But first, he'd have to survive long enough to figure out why his new bride stood in the barn every midnight, whispering to shadows that seemed to whisper back. The sound that woke Ezra wasn't quite singing and wasn't quite crying. Something in between that made his skin crawl like ants were marching beneath it. He'd been dreaming of green pastures and healthy cattle when the melody drifted through his bedroom window, soft as spider silk, but insistent as a toothache. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as he pulled on his boots, each bong echoing through the house like a funeral bell. Clara's room was empty, her bed unslept in. The white nightgown she'd worn hung on a peg like a ghost, and Her window stood wide open to the Montana night. Ezra followed the sound across the yard, past the dying vegetable garden where even the weeds had given up trying to grow. The barn door creaked on its hinges, moving back and forth in a breeze that touched nothing else on the still night. Inside, Clara knelt in the center of the hay-strewn floor, her dark hair loose around her shoulders like a mourning veil. She wore only her chemise, the white cotton gleaming pale as bone in the moonlight, streaming through the loft window. Around her the shadows seemed to dance. "Come back," she whispered to the darkness between the stalls. "Please, I've done everything you asked. Married him, brought the curse to his house. Now lift it from me." The shadows writhed, and for a moment Ezra could swear he saw faces in them, gaunt, hollow-eyed things that might once have been men. His 4 predecessors, perhaps, come to claim their bride. "I can't give you what you want." Clara's voice broke like a dam giving way. "I won't damn another innocent soul. Take me instead." One shadow detached itself from the others, flowing toward her like spilled ink. Clara didn't flinch as it circled her kneeling form, caressing her bare arms with fingers made of night. Where it touched, frost appeared on her skin despite the summer heat. "The bargain stands," a voice spoke from the darkness, cold as winter wind through cemetery gates. "4 husbands dead, 4 more to die. Until you give us what we came for, death follows where you walk." "What do you want from her?" The words left Ezra's mouth before he could stop them. Clara spun toward him, her face white with terror, and the shadows hissed like disturbed serpents. The temperature in the barn plummeted 20 degrees in an instant. "Go back to the house," Clara whispered urgently. "Don't let them see you care about me. That's how they killed the others. Through love." But Ezra stepped forward instead, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip. "Fat lot of good bullets would do against phantoms, but a man faced trouble with whatever tools he carried. I asked you a question," he said to the writhing darkness. "What do you want?" The shadow that had been touching Clara rose up like smoke, taking the vague shape of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. When it spoke, its voice held the rattle of dying breath. "She knows what we want, what she's always known. The secret her grandmother passed down, the power that runs in Whitmore blood. She thinks she can deny us forever, but every dead husband proves her wrong." Clara struggled to her feet, wrapping her arms around herself. "I won't become what you want me to be. I won't use the darkness to heal, no matter how many good men die because of my stubbornness." The pieces clicked together in Ezra's mind like a puzzle finding its solution. Clara wasn't cursed. She was gifted, some kind of healing power that these spirits wanted her to corrupt, to use for their own purposes. They killed her husbands to force her hand, to make her desperate enough, to embrace whatever darkness they offered. "How do we stop them?" he asked Clara directly, ignoring the way the shadows pressed closer, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. "You can't," she said, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "No one can. I've tried everything. Prayers, holy water, burning sage until the smoke choked me. They're bound to my bloodline until I give them what they want, or die trying to resist." The largest shadow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Dawn approaches, but we'll return tomorrow night. And the next, your cattle will keep dying, Blackwood, until she learns to obey." As the first pink light of sunrise touched the barn's eastern wall, the shadows melted away like frost before flame. Clara collapsed to her knees in the hay, sobbing with exhaustion and despair. Ezra knelt beside her, careful not to touch. Physical comfort might make things worse if the spirits were watching, but he could offer his presence, his acceptance. "There's got to be another way," he said quietly. "Every problem's got a solution if you look at it right." Clara raised her head, hope flickering in her green eyes like candlelight. "You believe me? You don't think I'm mad?" "Darling, I've seen too much strangeness in my life to dismiss anything out of hand." Besides, he stood and offered her his arm. Seems to me those spirits made one crucial mistake. They assumed I'd give up the woman I'm falling in love with without a fight. Clara's grandmother had been burned as a witch in Salem, but not before she'd escaped to the Montana Territory with secrets that could heal or destroy. The revelation came 3 days later as Clara and Ezra sat in the dusty attic above the main house, surrounded by trunks that hadn't been opened in decades. Clara's hands trembled as she lifted out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age and brittle as autumn leaves. Grandmother Mercy wrote everything down, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of wind rattling the roof shingles. Every remedy, every incantation, every warning about what happens when you use the gift wrong. Ezra leaned closer, breathing in the scent of lavender and old paper that clung to Clara's hair. In the 3 days since he'd found her in the barn, something had shifted between them. She no longer flinched when he entered a room. He'd caught her watching him with an expression that might have been longing if he'd dared to hope. The cattle were still dying, 2 more head just this morning, but Ezra had stopped counting losses and started planning for war. Listen to this. Clara opened the journal to a page marked with a pressed violet. Her voice took on the cadence of someone reading scripture. The Whitmore women carry the old blood, the healing gift that flows like water through willing hands. But the shadow spirits know our power, and they hunger for it. They will steal our joy, corrupt our love, turn our greatest strength into their weapon. She flipped several pages, her fingers finding another bookmark. I have seen what happens when a Whitmore woman breaks under their torment. Sarah Whitmore of Boston called forth plague to end her suffering. 10,000 souls paid the price. Margaret Whitmore of Virginia summoned drought to spite the spirits. Her entire county withered and died. Jesus, Ezra breathed. No wonder they want you to turn. There's more. Clara's voice grew smaller, more frightened. The spirits grow stronger with each generation, more cunning in their torments. They have learned that love is our weakness. Kill what a Whitmore woman cherishes, and eventually she will choose darkness over watching everything die. Outside, thunder rolled across the Montana sky, even though no clouds darkened the afternoon sun. The house groaned around them, timbers settling in ways that sounded almost like whispers. Clara turned to a page near the journal's end, where the handwriting grew shaky and desperate. I have found only one escape from their torment, and it requires the rarest thing of all, a man who loves without fear, who chooses hope over wisdom. If such a soul exists, if he can look upon our curse and call it blessing, then perhaps the chain might break. She looked up at Ezra, her green eyes swimming with tears. 4 husbands, and none of them truly loved me. They married me for water, rights, for land, for money. When the dying started, they all chose to blame me rather than fight for me. I'm not them, Ezra said simply. You might be. Her voice broke like thin ice over deep water. When the cattle start dying faster, when the crops fail, when the very earth seems to turn against you, how do I know you won't pack my bags yourself and put me on the first train east? Instead of answering with words, Ezra reached for her hand. Clara jerked back instinctively, but he persisted, his calloused fingers gentle as he traced the lines of her palm. Because, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I've never felt more alive than I have these past 3 days. Even with death stalking my land, even with shadows whispering threats, I wake up each morning knowing you're in my house, and everything seems possible. Clara's breath caught. Ezra. I've buried 2 wives, Clara. Good women who deserved better than what life gave them. But I never fought for them. Never had to. This time. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. This time, I know exactly what I'm fighting for. The journal slipped from Clara's lap, as she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his shoulder. For a moment they sat in perfect stillness, two damaged souls finding shelter in each other's presence. Then the screaming started outside. They rushed to the attic window to see Jonas running across the yard, his clothes smoking, his hair singed black. Behind him, the equipment barn blazed like a funeral pyre, orange flames licking at the afternoon sky. "The tools," Clara gasped. "All your farming equipment, the seed for next year's planting, can be replaced," Ezra finished grimly. "But this changes things. The spirits aren't waiting for midnight anymore." As if summoned by his words, shadows began pooling in the corners of the attic, despite the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. The temperature dropped so quickly that their breath came out in visible puffs. "They're getting stronger," Clara whispered. "Grandmother's journal says that means we're running out of time." The largest shadow took shape near the window, its voice like wind through a graveyard. "Choose quickly, witch child. Embrace the darkness, or watch everything burn." But Ezra was studying the journal's final pages, his mind racing through possibilities and half-formed plans. Because buried in Mercy Whitmore's desperate scrawling, he'd found something the spirits probably hoped they'd never discover. A ritual that could turn their own weapon against them, if he and Clara were brave enough to stake everything on one kiss that could either save them both or damn them forever. The ritual required three things: a love freely given, a life willingly risked, and the kiss of death transformed into the kiss of life. By sunset, half of Ezra's ranch was burning. The fire had spread from the equipment barn to the grain silo, then jumped to the pasture fencing with unnatural hunger. Ezra and his remaining hands, Jonas and two Mexican brothers named Miguel and Carlos, fought the flames with bucket brigades and wet blankets. But every flame they doused seemed to birth two more. "Boss, we got to evacuate!" Jonas shouted over the roar of burning timber. "This ain't no natural fire. It's moving against the wind." Clara stood on the front porch, clutching her grandmother's journal like a lifeline. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, her green eyes reflecting the orange hell consuming everything Ezra had built. The shadows danced around her feet, even in the firelight, growing bolder as darkness approached. "It's my fault," she called to him as he stumbled back from the burning barn, his eyebrows singed and his shirt smoking. "Every flame, every dead animal, it's all because I won't give them what they want." "What exactly do they want?" Ezra gasped, accepting the dipper of water Miguel handed him. His throat felt raw from smoke and shouting. Clara opened the journal to its final page, where her grandmother's handwriting devolved into desperate scratches. "For me to heal using their power, to let darkness flow through me instead of light. Once I do it even once, they own me. I become their instrument, spreading death instead of life." The shadows around her feet writhed with approval, their whispers growing louder. "Yes, child, feel the weight of all this death. How much easier it would be to stop fighting." "There's got to be another way," Ezra said, but even as the words left his mouth, he could see the doubt creeping into Clara's eyes. The fire was winning, his cattle were dying. How long before she decided his life wasn't worth the cost of her defiance? That's when the idea hit him like lightning striking dry timber. "Clara," he said urgently, "read me that ritual again, the one about breaking the chain." Her fingers found the page with trembling precision. "When shadow and light dance as one, when death kisses life and finds it sweet, when love proves stronger than fear, then shall the binding break and the hunted become the hunter." "It's not talking about you healing with their power," Ezra realized, his mind racing faster than the spreading flames. "It's talking about them trying to kill me through you, and failing." The largest shadow materialized between them, its form more solid than Ezra had ever seen it. The temperature plummeted so quickly that frost began forming on the porch railings. "Despite the inferno raging 50 yards away, "You understand nothing, fool. She is ours by blood and birthright. Every Whitmore woman bends eventually." "Maybe," Ezra said, stepping closer to Clara despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "But you made one mistake. You assumed I'd run when the dying started." He took Clara's face in his hands, ignoring the way ice crystals formed on his knuckles, where the shadow's influence touched him. Her skin was cold as marble, but her eyes burned with something that might have been hope. "Ezra, don't," she whispered. "If you kiss me now, while they're this strong, it might kill you. Or it might kill them," he said. "Your grandmother wrote that love could break the chain, but what if it's not just any love? What if it has to be a love strong enough to choose death over abandonment?" The shadows pressed closer, their whispers becoming shrieks. "No, she is ours, our weapon, our vessel, our—" Ezra's lips found Clara's, and the world exploded into fire and ice. The kiss was nothing like their chaste wedding peck. This was desperate and fierce, a claiming and a surrendering all at once. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt as if to anchor him to the living world, and Ezra tasted salt tears and something else, something electric and wild that made his heart race like a runaway horse. The shadows struck like vipers, pouring their killing cold into the space between Clara's lips and Ezra's. He felt it hit him like a physical blow, the same force that had stopped 4 good men's hearts. Ice spread through his veins, his lungs seized, his vision began to dim. But instead of pulling away, he kissed Clara deeper, because he could feel something else flowing between them, warmth that had nothing to do with the fires burning around them. Clara's healing gift, perhaps, or maybe just the simple miracle of 2 damaged souls choosing to trust each other completely. The cold retreated. The shadows screamed, and Clara's hands grew warm against his chest as power, real power, the kind that came from light instead of darkness, began to flow through her for the first time in years. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, the shadows were writhing like things in their death throes. The fires that had been consuming the ranch began to sputter and die, as if the very air had turned against them. "Impossible," the lead shadow hissed, its form already beginning to fray. "The binding cannot be broken. No mortal love is that strong." "Then you don't know much about cowboys," Ezra said, and kissed his wife again as the first green shoots began pushing up through the burned and blackened earth. The morning after the shadows died, Clara Blackwood, who woke to the sound of cattle lowing in pastures green as emerald dreams, she stood at her bedroom window, their bedroom window now, watching Ezra move among the herd with Jonas and the Mexican brothers. The Angus that had been dropping like flies just days before now grazed contentedly, their coats glossy with health. Where fire had scorched the earth black, wildflowers pushed through the soil in impossible profusion. Indian paintbrush and lupine, columbine and prairie rose. "Darling, you might want to see this," Ezra called from the yard below. Clara pulled on her wrapper and hurried downstairs, her bare feet silent on the pine boards. Outside, the morning air smelled of new grass and possibility instead of smoke. And death. The equipment barn stood whole and sound, though she'd watched it burn to ash just 12 hours before. "Look at that." Ezra pointed to where the grain silo had been consumed by unnatural flame. Now it rose pristine and full, golden wheat visible through the slats near the top. "It's like the fire never happened." "Better than that," Clara breathed, understanding flooding through her like sunrise. "It's like the curse never happened." She knelt and pressed her palms to the earth, feeling the life force that pulsed beneath the surface. For 26 years, everything she'd touched had withered or died. Now grass sprouted between her fingers, and she could sense the heartbeat of every living thing for miles around, not as a burden, but as a gift. "The healing power," she whispered. "It's still there, but clean now, free." Ezra knelt beside her, his calloused hand covering hers. Where their fingers interlaced, tiny white flowers bloomed in the shape of wedding rings. 4 husbands dead, Clara said softly. 4 good men who might have loved me if they'd had the chance. They chose fear over faith, Ezra replied. Can't fault them for it. Most men would. But their dying wasn't your fault, Clara. You were just a weapon those spirits tried to use. The blame belongs to them. She leaned into his shoulder, marveling at how solid and warm he felt, alive in a way that seemed to chase away shadows just by existing. What do we do now? She asked. I mean, after something like this, how do we just go back to raising cattle and tending crops? Ezra's grin was slow and wicked. Who says we're going back to anything ordinary? He helped her to her feet and led her toward the house where Jonas was waiting on the porch with a telegram in his weathered hands. This came from town, boss, the foreman said, his expression puzzled. Strangest thing, wire operator swears. It wasn't there when he opened up this morning, but there it sat on his desk like it had been waiting all night. Clara read the telegram over Ezra's shoulder, her eyes widening with each word. Urgent stop. Mysterious illness spreading through reservation. Stop medicine man. Requests assistance. Stop heard rumors of miracle woman. Stop will pay handsomely. Stop. The Crow reservation is 3 days' ride north, Ezra said thoughtfully. If your grandmother's journal is right about the healing gift running in families, there might be others, Clara finished. Other women fighting the same battle I was, but without anyone to help them break free. She looked down at her hands, still tingling with the warmth of new power, the ability to heal instead of harm, to bring life instead of death. For the first time since childhood, the future stretched ahead bright with possibility. We'll need supplies, she said practically, medical equipment, clean bandages, whatever medicines the town doctor can spare, and horses, good ones that can handle rough terrain. Already on it, Ezra said, and Clara realized he'd been planning this even before the telegram arrived. Figured a woman with your gifts wouldn't be content to sit around mending socks and churning butter. They spent the next hour making plans, their voices carrying across the ranch like music. Jonas listened with the skeptical approval of a man who'd seen too much strangeness to dismiss anything outright. Miguel and Carlos volunteered to tend the ranch while they were away, their eyes bright with the adventure of it all. As the sun climbed toward noon, Clara found herself back in the garden behind the house, the same plot where even weeds had refused to grow just days before. Now it bloomed like Eden, tomatoes heavy on the vine, and beans climbing toward heaven on their wooden stakes. Ezra found her there, surrounded by butterflies and the hum of busy bees. No regrets? He asked, settling beside her on the wooden bench. He'd built under the apple tree, only that it took me 4 dead husbands to find a man brave enough to kiss me back, she said, then smiled at his expression. That was a joke, cowboy. I'm allowed to make jokes about my own tragic past. He laughed and pulled her close, and Clara marveled at how right it felt to be held without fear, to love without counting the cost in graves and sorrow. Ready to go save the world, Mrs. Blackwood? Ezra asked as a cardinal landed on the apple tree above them, its song bright as morning. Ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, and sealed the promise with a kiss that made roses bloom in December and turned the Montana sky the color of hope. If this tale of love conquering darkness has warmed your heart like a campfire on a cold night, do share it with folks who need reminding that even the deepest curses can be broken by a willing heart. And if you're hankering for more stories where love blooms eternal, well, there's plenty more where this came from.